Night falls on the Anatolian plateau. The wind blows slowly over the ancient hills, and above, the stars come out one by one, cold and bright, the same stars that have watched over this place for thousands of years. Beneath that sky are the stone columns of Göbekli Tepe. The columns are hewn from limestone. Each weighs 20 tons. Some are taller than a house. They should not exist. Not here. Not at this age. And yet they do. Tonight, we ask a question that challenges everything we think we know. What if Göbekli Tepe, the world's oldest temple, is not the beginning of civilization, but the last remaining memory of an older civilization? This is not a statement. This is an exploration. Together, we will examine the evidence carefully and honestly. We'll look at what we know for sure, consider what's still uncertain, and consider what's possible. Wherever you are, Tokyo or London, California or New York, or anywhere in the world, leave your location in the comments below. And if you're ready to ask thoughtful questions and explore deeply, subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, let the journey begin. The stones have waited 11,600 years. Let us learn to listen. Chapter 1. The Established Facts. Let us begin with what is certain, what archaeology has proven beyond doubt, what we can touch, measure, and verify. Because before we venture into mystery, we must first stand firmly on solid ground. In the farmlands of southeastern Turkey, roughly 10 miles northeast of the ancient city of Şanlıurfa, rises a hill. The locals call it Göbekli Tepe, which means Potbelly Hill in Turkish. From a distance, it looks natural, unremarkable, just another gentle rise in the landscape. But it is not natural. Beneath that hill lies something that has rewritten human history. The story of its discovery begins in 1963. An American archaeologist named Peter Benedict was conducting a survey of the region. He noted the hill, observed some broken stones scattered on its surface, and dismissed it as nothing more than a medieval cemetery. The site was catalogued and forgotten. 31 years passed. In 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt was working in the region, studying early Neolithic sites. He had previously excavated a place called Nevale Chori, where he had found T-shaped pillars dating to around 9,000 years ago. When he read Benedict's brief mention of Göbekli Tepe in the old survey notes, something caught his attention. He decided to visit. What Schmidt saw that day changed everything. The broken stones on the surface were not medieval grave markers. They were limestone fragments, carved with reliefs of animals, and they were far, far older than anything he had expected. Schmidt recognized immediately that this was not just another Neolithic site. This was something unprecedented. Excavations began in 1995. Schmidt would lead the work for nearly 20 years, until his death in 2014. What his team uncovered beneath that hill was extraordinary. Massive, circular enclosures, pillars weighing tens of tons, intricate carvings depicting lions, snakes, foxes, vultures, and geometric symbols, and radiocarbon dating that placed the site at the very edge of the last ice age, roughly 11,600 years ago. Today, excavations continue under the direction of the German Archaeological Institute in collaboration with Turkish authorities. But even after decades of work, only about 10% of the site has been uncovered. 90% remains buried, waiting beneath the earth. So what exactly have archaeologists found? Let us walk through the evidence, piece by piece. The site consists of multiple circular or oval enclosures, each built around pairs of massive T-shaped limestone pillars. These pillars are extraordinary. The tallest stand more than 5.5 meters high, roughly 18 feet. They weigh between 8 and 50 tons each. Some are plain. Others are covered in deeply carved reliefs, animals, and abstract symbols rendered with confident, practiced skill. The pillars are shaped like the letter T. The horizontal top represents the head. The vertical shaft represents the body. On some pillars, arms are carved into the lower portion, bent at the elbows, hands meeting at the front. Belts are depicted, loincloths. These are not abstract monuments. They are stylized representations of the human form. Silent figures standing in circles, facing inward, watching. Each enclosure is different in size. The smallest measure, about 10 meters across, roughly 30 feet. The largest reach 30 meters, nearly 100 feet in diameter. At the center of each enclosure stand two taller pillars. The central pair, around them, smaller pillars are arranged in a ring, connected by low stone walls or benches. The floors are made of terrazzo, a polished lime plaster, smooth and carefully finished. So far, archaeologists have identified and partially excavated several of these enclosures. They are labeled with letters: Enclosure A, Enclosure B, Enclosure C, Enclosure D. Each has its own character, its own dominant imagery. In Enclosure A, snakes are the most common motif, carved in clusters, sometimes dozens of serpents moving in parallel waves across the stone. In Enclosure B, foxes dominate, their lean bodies and sharp faces rendered in crisp relief. Enclosure C features wild boars, powerful and aggressive. And in Enclosure D, birds take center stage, especially vultures, wings spread wide, beaks sharp. Why each enclosure features different animals is still debated. Some archaeologists believe they represent different clans or groups, each with their own totem, their own identity. Others suggest the animals have symbolic or cosmological meanings we do not yet understand. The truth is, we do not know for certain, but the pattern is clear. Each circle has its dominant creature carved again and again into the stone. Beyond the animals, there are abstract symbols, H-shapes, crescents, circles, forms that might represent the sun or the moon, or something else entirely. On some pillars, these symbols are grouped together in ways that suggest meaning, perhaps a kind of proto-writing or symbolic language. But again, we cannot read it. We can only observe and wonder. The pillars themselves were quarried from the limestone plateau on which Göbekli Tepe sits. Archaeologists have found the quarries, still visible today, where ancient workers cut the stone directly from the bedrock. They would carve channels around the shape they wanted, defining the outline of a pillar, and then use wooden wedges to lever the massive block free. It was slow, difficult work, done entirely with stone tools. Thousands of flint blades, scrapers, and hammers have been found scattered across the site, the debris of construction that took place more than 11,000 years ago. Once quarried, the pillars had to be moved. Some were transported hundreds of meters across uneven ground. How this was accomplished is still debated. There were no wheels, no metal tools, no draft animals. Some researchers estimate it would have taken dozens, even hundreds of people, pulling with ropes, perhaps using rollers or sledges, coordinating their effort over days or weeks. Others believe smaller teams could have managed it with clever techniques, water or fat as lubricant, ramps and levers. Experimental archaeology has offered various possibilities, but no definitive answer. What is certain is that it was done. The stones stand as proof. And then there is the artistry. The carvings are not crude. They are not the hesitant scratchings of people learning to work stone for the first time. The lines are deep, confident, precise. The animals are anatomically accurate, their musculature suggested, their postures dynamic. Whoever carved these images knew what they were doing. They had skill, inherited or learned, passed down or practiced over time. One pillar in particular has captured widespread attention. Pillar 43, located in Enclosure D, often called the Vulture Stone. On its surface is a complex scene. At the top, three circular symbols, interpreted by some as the sun or perhaps discs. Below them, a large bird, likely a vulture, with one wing extended upward, as though offering something. Lower still, a scorpion looms large, claws open, tail curled. And at the bottom, a small human figure, headless, with arms at its sides and an erect phallus. The meaning of this scene is fiercely debated. Some see it as a depiction of death, a sky burial where vultures consume the dead. Others interpret it as astronomical, the symbols representing constellations, the scorpion, perhaps Scorpius, the bird, perhaps Cygnus. Still others suggest it records a cosmic event, a comet impact, a catastrophe. We will return to these theories later. For now, it is enough to say that Pillar 43 is rich with imagery we do not yet fully understand. Now let us turn to the dating. How do we know how old Göbekli Tepe is? The answer lies in radiocarbon analysis, a method that measures the decay of carbon-14 in organic materials. Wood, bone, seeds, anything that was once alive can be dated this way. Stone cannot. Limestone holds no carbon-14 to measure, so the pillars themselves cannot be directly dated. What archaeologists date is the material found around the pillars, the organic debris that accumulated during the site's use and eventual burial. Samples taken from the fill, the sediment packed around the structures, have been tested repeatedly. The results are consistent. The site was actively used during the pre-pottery Neolithic A and early pre-pottery Neolithic B periods, roughly from 9,500 to 8,000 years before the Common Era. That places the construction and use of Göbekli Tepe between 11,500 and 10,000 years ago. To put that in perspective, this is 6,000 years before Stonehenge, 4,000 years before the Great Pyramids of Egypt. This is before the invention of writing, before the invention of pottery, before the domestication of animals, before agriculture, or at least before agriculture became widespread. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were, by all evidence, hunter-gatherers. Mobile groups who lived by hunting wild game and gathering wild plants. And yet they built this. That is the central mystery, the fact that troubles the old models of human development. For generations, archaeologists believed that civilization followed a clear sequence. First came agriculture. Farming allowed people to settle in one place, to produce surplus food. Surplus food supported larger populations. Larger populations enabled specialization, trade, and eventually cities. And cities, with their stability and resources, gave birth to monumental architecture, temples, palaces, pyramids. Göbekli Tepe reverses that sequence. Here, the monumental architecture comes first. The temple precedes the city. Organization and ambition precede agriculture. Klaus Schmidt, the site's excavator, famously said, "First came the temple, then the city." He believed that the effort required to build Göbekli Tepe, the need to feed and coordinate large groups of people repeatedly over generations, may have driven the development of agriculture, not the other way around. The desire to gather, to build, to worship, or celebrate or commemorate created the need for reliable food sources. And so farming was born, not as a cause of civilization, but as a response to it. This idea is still debated. But what is not debated is the fact that Göbekli Tepe exists, that it was built by people without cities or farms, and that it required a level of social organization and ambition no one thought possible at that time in history. Let us consider what we know about the people who built it. They left no written records. They left no graves, at least none that have been found intact. What they left are bones, tools, and stones. From these, archaeologists have pieced together a picture. The bones tell us what they ate. More than 100,000 animal bones have been recovered from the site. Most are from wild species. Gazelles, aurochs, the wild ancestors of cattle, wild boar, wild sheep and goats, birds, especially waterfowl. These are the remains of feasts, meals consumed by large groups gathered at the site. Cut marks on the bones show butchering. Splintering shows marrow extraction. Burn marks indicate cooking. This was not a place where people lived day to day, grinding grain and tending hearths. This was a place where people came together, perhaps seasonally, to gather, to feast, to build, and to participate in something larger than themselves. The tools are flint, obsidian, and limestone, blades for cutting, scrapers for working hides, hammers and picks for quarrying and shaping stone, grinding stones, thousands of them, used for processing wild cereals. Recent analysis has shown that the site contains over 7,000 stone tools related to food processing alone, grinding slabs, handstones, pestles, mortars. The sheer number is extraordinary, far more than at other sites of the same period. This suggests that while the people who built Göbekli Tepe were primarily hunters, they were also processing large quantities of wild grains, perhaps to make bread or beer for the gatherings. Some researchers have even suggested that the effort to feed the workers at Göbekli Tepe may have led to early experiments in cultivation, the first tentative steps toward farming. There is also evidence of water management. Channels carved into the bedrock directed rainwater into cisterns, also carved from stone. These cisterns could hold significant amounts of water, enough to supply a large temporary population. The site was not just a ceremonial center, it was engineered for habitation, at least on a periodic basis. More recently, excavations have revealed smaller rectangular buildings surrounding the great circular enclosures. These structures, built later in the site's history, appear to be domestic. Hearths, storage areas, walls. They suggest that over time, Göbekli Tepe may have transitioned from a purely ritual center visited seasonally to a more permanent settlement, or at least a place where some people stayed year-round to maintain the site and continue construction. This complicates the story. Initially, Schmidt believed Göbekli Tepe was a sanctuary, a place with no residential function, visited by pilgrims from across the region. Now, the evidence suggests a more complex reality. Ritual and daily life coexisted. The sacred and the mundane were not separate. People lived here, worked here, worshipped here, feasted here. The boundaries we draw between these categories may not have existed in their minds. One more fact worth noting: Göbekli Tepe is not alone. In recent years, other sites in the region have been discovered, places with similar T-shaped pillars, similar circular enclosures, similar styles of carving. Karahan Tepe, about 45 kilometers away, may be even larger than Göbekli Tepe. Harbetsuvan Tepesi, Sefer Tepe, Seyburs, and others. Together, these sites form what archaeologists now call the Taş Tepeler, the Stone Hills. They represent a regional culture, a network of communities connected by shared beliefs, shared techniques, and shared ambitions. Göbekli Tepe was not an isolated anomaly. It was part of something larger. And then, sometime around 8000 BCE, it ended. The great enclosures were filled in. Rubble, sediment, broken stones, animal bones, all packed tightly around the pillars. Whether this was done deliberately, an intentional burial to preserve or protect the site, or whether it was the result of natural processes, landslides and erosion, is still debated. We will return to this question later. For now, it is enough to say that the site was covered, and it remained hidden for 10,000 years, until Klaus Schmidt uncovered it again. So let us summarize what we know for certain. Göbekli Tepe was built roughly 11,600 years ago by hunter-gatherer societies during the pre-pottery Neolithic period. It consists of multiple circular enclosures, centered on massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing 50 tons, carved with images of animals and abstract symbols. The construction required quarrying, transporting, and erecting these stones using only stone tools, an achievement that demanded coordination, planning, and sustained effort over generations. The site was used for feasting, ritual, and possibly seasonal habitation. It was part of a larger regional culture, and sometime around 10,000 years ago, it was buried, intentionally or naturally, and remained hidden until its rediscovery in the late 20th century. This is what we know. This is the foundation, and it is extraordinary. Even without speculation, even without pushing the dates back further or invoking lost civilizations, Göbekli Tepe is one of the most important archaeological discoveries in history. It forces us to reconsider the capabilities of our ancestors, to acknowledge that sophistication, organization, and ambition existed far earlier than we once believed. But knowing the facts is only the beginning, because within these facts lie questions. Puzzles that trouble even the most cautious archaeologists, mysteries that resist easy explanation. And it is to those questions we now turn. Chapter 2. The Orthodox Miracle. Now let us turn to what makes Göbekli Tepe truly extraordinary, not through speculation, but through simple observation. Let us look at what the stones themselves reveal. The engineering, the precision, the knowledge required, because even accepting the orthodox timeline, even believing that hunter-gatherers built this 11,600 years ago, we are still confronted with a mystery that demands explanation. How did they do it? Begin with the stones themselves. The pillars of Göbekli Tepe are carved from limestone, quarried directly from the plateau on which the site sits. This is not soft sandstone. This is dense, hard limestone. Working it requires effort, patience, and technique, and the scale is staggering. The largest pillar found so far, still lying in its quarry, unfinished, measures more than 7 meters long, roughly 23 feet, and weighs an estimated 50 tons. 50 tons. To put that in perspective, a modern pickup truck weighs about 2 tons. An elephant weighs roughly 6 tons. 50 tons is the weight of a loaded semi-truck, or 8 full-grown elephants. And this is stone, solid, immovable, carved from bedrock with tools made of flint. The archaeologists have found the quarries. On the western edge of the plateau, channels are still visible, carved into the limestone, defining the shape of pillars that were never finished. The method is clear. Workers would chisel a trench around the outline of the pillar they wanted, a rectangular channel, perhaps 20 centimeters wide, carving down into the stone until they reached the desired depth. Then they would carve beneath the pillar, separating it from the bedrock below. Finally, wooden wedges would be driven into cracks or carved slots, and the massive block would be levered free. This is slow work. Even with metal tools, quarrying stone of this size takes weeks. With flint picks and stone hammers, it would take far longer. Flint is hard enough to chip limestone, but it wears down quickly. A single tool might last only hours of sustained use before it becomes too dull or breaks. Thousands of flint tools have been found at Göbekli Tepe, scattered across the quarries and the enclosures, the discarded debris of endless labor. But quarrying the stone is only the first challenge. Once free, the pillar must be moved. The quarries are located on the plateau, sometimes hundreds of meters from the enclosures where the pillars were erected. The ground between is uneven, rocky, sloping in places, and there are no wheels, no carts, no animals to pull the load, just people, ropes, and whatever methods they could devise. Archaeologists have debated this extensively. Some, following Klaus Schmidt's estimates, believe it would have required hundreds of people to move a single large pillar. Schmidt compared it to the Moai of Easter Island, the massive stone heads that required large teams pulling with ropes, using logs as rollers, coordinating their effort over days. Experiments with moving the Moai suggest that a stone of similar size to a Göbekli Tepe pillar would need at least 50 to 75 people, working together just to transport it a short distance. Others are more optimistic. Recent experiments, including some conducted at Göbekli Tepe itself, suggest that with the right technique, smaller teams could manage. Ropes made from plant fibers, strong and flexible. Water or animal fat used as lubricant to reduce friction. Wooden sledges or rollers. A-frame levers to lift and shift the stone incrementally. With these methods, researchers estimate that as few as 7 to 12 people might move a 20-ton pillar slowly, carefully, across flat ground. But Göbekli Tepe is not on flat ground. It sits on a hill. The stones had to be moved uphill in some cases, or maneuvered around obstacles. Even with optimal technique, this would require more people, more time, more coordination. And then, once the pillar reached its destination, it had to be erected, raised upright, positioned precisely within the enclosure. The bases of the pillars were set into sockets carved into the bedrock, deep holes that held the stones stable. Lifting a 50-ton pillar upright and lowering it into a socket without modern cranes is an extraordinary feat. Again, experiments offer possibilities. Earth ramps, levers and fulcrums, teams pulling from multiple directions. But the fact remains, it was done. Multiple times. For multiple pillars. In multiple enclosures. This is not simple. This is not something a handful of people accomplish on a whim. This requires planning, leadership, sustained effort, and knowledge passed down through generations. Now consider the carving. The pillars are not just cut blocks. They are sculpted, shaped, decorated. The T-form itself is precise, the horizontal cap meeting the vertical shaft at right angles, smoothed and polished. On many pillars, reliefs are carved into the surface. Animals rendered in deep, confident lines. Foxes stretching mid-leap. Lions with bared teeth. Snakes coiling in groups, their scales suggested with fine detail. Vultures with wings spread, feathers indicated with parallel grooves. scorpions with segmented bodies and curving tails. These are not crude images. They are anatomically accurate. The proportions are correct. The poses are naturalistic. Whoever carved these animals knew them intimately, had observed them closely, understood how they moved, how their bodies were structured, and the carving itself shows no hesitation. The lines do not waver. There are no false starts, no mistakes corrected. This is the work of skilled hands, confident and practiced. Some of the carvings are in high relief, the figures standing out from the stone, almost three-dimensional. Others are in low relief, incised into the surface. Both techniques require control, an understanding of how stone responds to pressure, how to follow the grain, how to achieve depth without cracking or splitting the block. This is not beginner's work. This is mastery. And beyond the animals, there are the abstract symbols. 8 shapes carved repeatedly on certain pillars. Circles and crescents. Forms that might be pictograms, early attempts to record information, or they might be purely symbolic, meaningful in ways we no longer grasp. Some researchers have noted that certain symbols appear in groups, arranged in patterns that suggest intention. On Pillar 18 in Enclosure D, for example, a series of V-shapes are carved in rows. Some interpret these as a tally, a count of something, days perhaps, or lunar cycles. Others see them as decorative or symbolic. We do not know, but the precision with which they are executed is undeniable. Now let us consider the geometry. For a long time, archaeologists assumed that the enclosures at Göbekli Tepe were built sequentially, one after another over centuries, without a master plan. But recent analysis suggests otherwise. In 2020, a researcher named Gil Hackley published a study using advanced architectural modeling. He found that 3 of the main enclosures, B, C, and D, are positioned according to a geometric pattern. Their centers form an equilateral triangle, not approximately, nearly perfectly. The sides of this triangle measure close to 19 meters each, and the alignment is precise to within a few degrees. An equilateral triangle, a shape with 3 sides of equal length, 3 angles of exactly 60 degrees each. This is not something that happens by accident. This requires measurement, planning, and execution according to a predetermined design. Hackley suggests that the builders may have used ropes of specific lengths, stretching them out to mark the positions before construction began, ensuring that each enclosure would align with the others. This implies a level of geometric understanding and forethought that is, frankly, unexpected for people supposedly living hand-to-mouth in a world without writing or formal education. And if the 3 enclosures were planned together as a unified complex, then the construction of Göbekli Tepe was not a gradual, organic process. It was an intentional project, conceived as a whole, executed over time according to a vision held by someone or some group with the authority and knowledge to see it through. This raises questions. Who designed it? Was there a single architect, a visionary, who planned the layout and directed the work? Or was the knowledge collective, shared among the community, passed down through oral tradition and practice? How did they measure distances accurately? How did they ensure that the geometry held across such large scales? We do not know. But the evidence of the triangle is there, measurable, undeniable. Now let us turn to a question that has generated enormous debate. The astronomical alignments. Some researchers argue that the enclosures at Göbekli Tepe are oriented according to celestial patterns, aligned with the rising or setting of certain stars. Others are skeptical, suggesting that people see patterns where none exist, that the alignments are coincidental or exaggerated. Let us examine the claims carefully. Several studies have proposed that the central pillars in the main enclosures align with specific stars or constellations. One of the most discussed is the alignment with the star Deneb, the brightest star in the constellation Cygnus, the Swan. Deneb is part of an asterism known as the Northern Cross, and some researchers believe that the imagery at Göbekli Tepe, particularly the bird figures, may represent this constellation. The argument goes like this. Around 10,000 BCE, due to the precession of the Earth's axis, the slow wobble that changes which stars appear where in the sky over thousands of years, Deneb would have been visible, rising in the northeast at a specific angle. If you stand at the center of certain enclosures and look along the line defined by the two central pillars, that line points roughly toward where Deneb would have risen. The correlation is not perfect, but it is close enough to be intriguing. Other researchers have suggested that Pillar 43, the vulture stone, encodes astronomical information. The scorpion carved on the pillar may represent the constellation Scorpius. The bird may be Cygnus or Aquila, the eagle. The circular symbols at the top may be the sun, or planets, or stars. If this interpretation is correct, then the pillar could be depicting the sky as it appeared at a specific time, a kind of star map carved in stone. Some have gone further, suggesting that the arrangement of animals on the pillar corresponds to the position of constellations during the Younger Dryas period, around 10,950 years ago, and that the pillar is recording a cosmic event, perhaps the impact of a comet. This is a controversial theory, championed most notably by researchers Martin Sweatman and Graham Hancock, and we will return to it when we discuss alternative hypotheses. For now, let us simply note that the theory exists, and that it is based on attempting to match the carvings with astronomical positions. The skeptics raise valid points. First, the alignments are not perfect. If the builders truly intended to align their structures with specific stars, why are the angles not more precise? Enclosure A, for example, does not align with Deneb in the same way as enclosures C and D. If the purpose was astronomical, we would expect consistency. The variation suggests that either the alignments are coincidental, or that astronomy was one factor among many, not the primary design principle. Second, human beings are exceptionally good at finding patterns, even where none exist. This is called pareidolia, the tendency to see meaningful shapes in random data. Constellations themselves are a form of pareidolia. We look at scattered stars and see lions, scorpions, hunters. It is possible that researchers are projecting meaning onto the carvings, seeing star maps because they expect to find them, not because the builders intended them. Third, without written records or explicit evidence that the builders observed the stars in this way, any astronomical interpretation remains speculative. It is one possible reading among many. The animals could just as easily represent totems, clan symbols, spirits, or mythological beings, with no connection to the night sky at all. That said, the possibility cannot be dismissed entirely. Ancient peoples were acute observers of the sky. The movements of the sun, moon, and stars governed their lives, marking seasons, guiding navigation, structuring ritual calendars. It is entirely plausible that the builders of Göbekli Tepe paid attention to celestial patterns, that they encoded this knowledge in their monuments, and that we, lacking their context, struggle to read it correctly. The honest assessment is this: some alignments at Göbekli Tepe appear non-random. Some imagery could plausibly represent celestial objects. But whether this was intentional, central to the site's purpose, or merely incidental, we cannot say with certainty. The debate is legitimate. The evidence is suggestive but not conclusive, and that is acceptable. Mystery does not require resolution to be meaningful. Let us consider one more aspect of the site that defies easy explanation: the deliberate burial. Around 8000 BCE, after perhaps 1500 years of use, the enclosures at Göbekli Tepe were filled in, packed with rubble, stone fragments, animal bones, broken tools, sediment. Deliberately, methodically, the great pillars were surrounded and covered, and the site was sealed beneath the earth. Or was it deliberate? This question has become contentious. Klaus Schmidt believed the burial was intentional, a ritualized act of closure or preservation. He pointed to the uniformity of the fill, the way the sediment was packed tightly around the pillars, and the sheer effort required to move such quantities of material. Natural erosion, he argued, does not produce this kind of layering. It is too consistent, too methodical. Schmidt compared it to the burial of other structures in the ancient Near East, where buildings were ritually closed at the end of their use, filled in and covered as a way of marking the end of an era. But after Schmidt's death in 2014, the current site director, Lee Clare, began to question this interpretation. Clare's analysis of the stratigraphy, the layers of sediment, suggests that at least some of the burial was not intentional, but the result of natural landslides. The site sits on a slope, and during periods of heavy rain, sediment from higher up the hill would have flowed downward, accumulating around the structures. Evidence of multiple landslide events has been documented, including one major collapse that damaged Enclosure D, cracking walls and toppling pillars. Repairs were made at the time, terrace walls were built to prevent future damage, but eventually a second landslide occurred, and the enclosure was abandoned. If Claire is correct, then the burial was not a single, intentional act, but a gradual process, a combination of human abandonment and natural infill. People stopped maintaining the site, and over centuries, the elements buried it. But others, including geologist Robert Schoch, disagree. Schoch has examined the site and argues that the fill is too uniform, too tightly packed, to be entirely natural. He points to secondary walls built between the pillars, crude stone barriers that seem designed to hold the fill in place, as though the site was being deliberately sealed. Schoch believes Schmidt was right, that the burial was intentional, an act undertaken with purpose. The truth may lie somewhere in between. Perhaps the site was damaged by landslides, and the community, rather than repair it again, decided to fill in the structures, to protect what remained by covering it. A pragmatic decision made sacred by ritual. Or perhaps the burial was entirely deliberate, a ceremonial act we no longer understand, carried out for reasons lost to time. What is clear is that the effort required to bury Göbekli Tepe, whether intentional or aided by nature, was immense. Tons of rubble, thousands of stones. It took work to fill those enclosures, to pack the sediment around those pillars, and the result was preservation. The burial protected the site from weathering, from vandalism, from the slow destruction of wind and rain. For 10,000 years, Göbekli Tepe lay hidden, and when it was finally uncovered, the stones were still there, the carvings still sharp, waiting. So let us step back and consider what we have seen. Göbekli Tepe, built 11,600 years ago by hunter-gatherer societies, consists of massive limestone pillars, some weighing 50 tons, quarried, transported, and erected without metal tools, wheels, or draft animals. The pillars are carved with precision and skill, depicting animals and symbols that suggest deep observation and inherited knowledge. The enclosures are arranged according to geometric principles, possibly an equilateral triangle, implying planning and design. Some alignments may correspond to celestial patterns, though this remains debated. And the site was buried, deliberately or naturally, in a way that preserved it for millennia. This is extraordinary. Even without pushing the dates back, even without invoking lost civilizations or ancient aliens, even accepting the orthodox timeline, Göbekli Tepe represents a level of achievement that should not be possible for people living in that time and place. And yet it is there. Real. Measurable. Undeniable. The orthodox explanation, the one most archaeologists hold, is that we have underestimated our ancestors, that human beings 11,600 years ago were more capable, more organized, more ambitious than we gave them credit for, that the drive to create, to gather, to build something lasting, existed long before cities and farms. That culture and belief, not agriculture and surplus, were the true engines of civilization. This is a profound realization. It does not diminish the mystery. It deepens it. Because if hunter-gatherers could do this, what else were they capable of? What other knowledge did they possess? What other structures might lie buried, waiting to be found? But even as we marvel at what the orthodox view reveals, questions remain. Questions that trouble even the most cautious researchers. Questions that suggest, perhaps, that the story is not yet complete. And it is to those questions we now turn. Chapter 3. The Unanswered Questions. We have walked through the evidence. We have seen what archaeology has proven. The stones, the dates, the scale of achievement, all of it extraordinary, all of it verified. But within these facts, woven through the certainty, are threads that do not quite connect. Questions that resist easy answers. Puzzles that trouble even those who built their careers on understanding the past. Let us examine these questions carefully, not to undermine what we know, but to acknowledge what we do not. Because honest inquiry requires us to admit the limits of our understanding, and at Göbekli Tepe, those limits are closer than we might wish. Begin with the most fundamental question. Where did the knowledge come from? Göbekli Tepe does not emerge from a vacuum. It appears, fully formed, in the archaeological record around 9500 BCE. The pillars are massive, the carvings sophisticated, the geometry precise. This is not beginner's work. This is mastery. And yet, where are the earlier attempts? Where are the practice sites, the smaller, cruder versions that would mark the learning process? In most cases, when a new technology or artistic tradition emerges, we find a developmental sequence, simple forms first, gradually becoming more complex. Early pottery is rough, uneven, poorly fired. Over generations, it improves. Techniques are refined, standards rise. The same with metalworking, with writing, with architecture. We see the progression, the mistakes, the innovations, the slow accumulation of knowledge. But at Göbekli Tepe, this sequence is absent. The earliest enclosures, the ones at the bottom of the stratigraphic layers, are also the most impressive. Enclosure D, one of the oldest, has the largest pillars, the most intricate carvings, the most careful construction. The later structures are smaller, less ambitious, as though the knowledge is fading rather than growing. This is the opposite of what we expect. Archaeologists have searched for precursor sites, places where the techniques seen at Göbekli Tepe might have been developed, tested, perfected. Some candidates exist. Nevala Chori, a site now submerged beneath a reservoir, had T-shaped pillars and similar iconography, and it dates to roughly the same period. But Nevala Chori is not earlier. It is contemporary, part of the same cultural network. It does not explain where the tradition began. Jerf el Ahmar, another site in the region, shows early communal buildings and symbolic art, but nothing approaching the scale or sophistication of Göbekli Tepe. Chayonu, Halanchemi, other Neolithic sites in southeastern Turkey and northern Syria all show evidence of early architecture and social complexity. But again, nothing that prepares us for Göbekli Tepe. It is as though the builders arrived with the knowledge already in hand, as though they inherited it. But from whom? From where? One possibility is that the precursor sites simply have not been found yet. The region is vast. Many tells, the mounded remains of ancient settlements, have never been excavated. Ground-penetrating radar and satellite imaging are revealing new sites constantly. Perhaps the developmental sequence exists, buried under fields and villages, waiting for archaeologists to uncover it. This is plausible. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because we have not found earlier sites does not mean they do not exist. But there is another possibility, more difficult to accept, that the knowledge was passed down orally, through generations, without leaving a physical trace. That the techniques for quarrying, carving, and erecting stone were learned through apprenticeship, observation, and practice, preserved in memory and gesture rather than in monuments. That the builders of Göbekli Tepe were the inheritors of a tradition that stretched back further than we can see, into a time before stone structures, when knowledge was carried in the mind and expressed in materials that have not survived. Wood, for instance, organic structures, shelters, totems, all would have decayed long ago, leaving no trace. If earlier peoples built with wood, practiced their carving on wood, refined their techniques over millennia on materials that rotted away, then by the time they turned to stone, they would already be masters. Göbekli Tepe would represent not the beginning of the tradition, but the moment it was finally rendered in a medium that endures. This is speculative, but it is not unreasonable. Many cultures have long oral traditions, knowledge passed from teacher to student, generation to generation, without writing, without physical records. The skills of flint knapping, hide tanning, tracking, all were transmitted this way for tens of thousands of years. Why not the knowledge of construction, geometry, and symbolic art? Still, the question lingers. If the tradition is so old, why does it appear suddenly in stone at Göbekli Tepe? Why not earlier? Why here? We do not know. Now consider the question of purpose. What was Göbekli Tepe for? Klaus Schmidt believed it was a sanctuary, a temple, a place of pilgrimage. He argued that the site had no residential function, that people came from miles around to participate in rituals, feasts, and communal labor, and then return to their home territories. The lack of domestic debris, hearths, trash pits, all supported this interpretation. Göbekli Tepe was not a place where people lived. It was a place where people gathered. But more recent excavations have complicated this view. Rectangular buildings, clearly domestic in function, have been found surrounding the great circular enclosures. Hearths, storage areas, walls, evidence of daily life. The boundaries between sacred and mundane, between ritual space and living space, are not as clear as Schmidt believed. And then there are the grinding stones. Over 7,000 tools related to food processing have been recovered from the site. Grinding slabs, handstones, pestles, mortars, all used for processing cereals. This is an extraordinary number, far more than at other sites of the same period. It suggests that large quantities of wild grains were being processed at Göbekli Tepe, perhaps to make bread or beer for the feasts, perhaps to feed the workers who built and maintained the structures. Phytolith analysis, the study of microscopic silica structures from plants, confirms the presence of cereals at the site. Barley, wheat, grasses. These were wild species, not yet domesticated, but they were being harvested and processed on a significant scale. So was Göbekli Tepe purely ritual, or was it also a center of production, a place where food was prepared, where labor was organized, where people not only worshipped but also worked and lived, at least part of the time? The answer seems to be both. Or rather, the categories we use, ritual versus domestic, sacred versus profane, may not apply. To the people who built Göbekli Tepe, there may have been no separation. Building the enclosures was ritual. Feasting was ritual. Processing grain, carving stone, gathering in circles under the stars, all of it was woven together, sacred and practical at once. But this still does not tell us the ultimate purpose. Why build it at all? What need did it serve? Some researchers suggest it was about identity. Each enclosure, with its dominant animal, snake, fox, boar, bird, represents a different clan or lineage. The act of building together, erecting these massive pillars, reinforced social bonds, marked group identity, created a shared history. The site was a place where separate groups came together, recognized each other, cooperated, and in doing so, forged a larger sense of community. Others emphasize the astronomical or cosmological function. If the alignments are intentional, if the carvings represent constellations or celestial events, then Göbekli Tepe may have been an observatory, a place to track the movements of the sky, to mark the passage of seasons, to connect earthly life with the heavens above. This would make it not just a temple, but a calendar, a tool for ordering time and understanding the cosmos. Still others suggest initiation. The enclosures, if they were roofed, would have been dark, enclosed spaces, accessible only through openings in the ceiling. Entering would be like descending into another world. The fierce animals carved on the pillars, predators and scavengers, creatures associated with danger and death, might have been part of initiation rites for young hunters, trials where boys became men, where fear was confronted and mastery proven. Or perhaps it was about death. The presence of modified human skulls, carved and drilled in ways not seen at other sites, suggests a skull cult, practices related to ancestors or the dead. If sky burial was practiced, if bodies were exposed to vultures on the plateau, as some researchers believe, then Göbekli Tepe could be a place where the dead were honored, where their bones were processed, where the living communed with those who had passed. Or all of these, or none. The truth is, we do not know. We can describe what is there. We can measure and analyze. But the meaning, the purpose, as it existed in the minds of the builders, remains hidden. Now let us turn to the symbols, the H shapes, the crescents, the V-forms, the circles. What do they mean? This is one of the most frustrating aspects of Göbekli Tepe. We can see the symbols. We can photograph them, catalogue them, note where they appear, and how often, but we cannot read them. They are not writing, at least not in the sense we understand writing. There is no alphabet, no phonetic system, no grammar. But they are clearly intentional. They recur. They are placed with care. They mean something. Some researchers have proposed that the symbols represent a proto-writing system, an early attempt to record information, perhaps tallies, perhaps names, perhaps concepts. The V-shapes, carved in rows on certain pillars, for instance, could be counting marks. 11 V-shapes might represent 11 days, or 11 moons, or 11 events. This is plausible. Many ancient cultures used simple marks to keep track of quantities before developing more complex writing systems. Others suggest the symbols are cosmological. The H shape, for example, appears frequently at Göbekli Tepe and other Neolithic sites in the region. Some interpret it as a representation of a temple or gateway, two pillars supporting a lintel, a doorway between worlds. The crescent might represent the moon. The circle might represent the sun. Together, they could encode information about lunar cycles, solar years, the relationship between celestial bodies and earthly time. In 2024, a study proposed that the 11 pillars found in many enclosures, combined with V-shaped symbols on Pillar 43, represent a lunisolar calendar system. A lunar year is roughly 354 days. A solar year is 365 days. The difference is 11 days. If you want to keep a lunar calendar synchronized with the solar year, you must add 11 extra days, called epigomenal days, at the end of each year. The presence of 11 pillars, the researchers argue, could symbolize this system. The V-shapes could mark the days. This is an elegant theory. It would mean that the people of Göbekli Tepe understood the relationship between lunar and solar cycles, that they had developed a sophisticated calendar, and that they encoded this knowledge in their architecture. If true, it would demonstrate a level of astronomical understanding far beyond what we usually attribute to pre-agricultural societies. But it is not proven. It is one interpretation among many. Other researchers are skeptical. The number 11 could be coincidental. The V-shapes could mean something else entirely. Without written records to confirm the interpretation, we are left guessing. And this is the essential problem. Symbols without context are ambiguous. We project meaning onto them based on our assumptions, our expectations, our cultural frameworks, but we do not know if our projections are correct. The builders of Göbekli Tepe are gone. Their voices are silent. The symbols remain, but their language is lost. Perhaps future discoveries will provide context. Perhaps a site with clearer notation or overlapping symbols that act as a Rosetta Stone will allow us to decode the meanings. Or perhaps we will never know. Perhaps some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only contemplated. Now, let us address a question that has generated considerable excitement and controversy: the astronomical interpretations of Pillar 43. Pillar 43, located in Enclosure D, is one of the most complex and debated carvings at the site. At the top, 3 circular or semicircular shapes. Below them, a large bird, likely a vulture, with one wing extended upward. Below the bird, a massive scorpion, claws open, tail curved. And at the bottom, a small human figure, headless, with an erect phallus. The imagery is striking. The vulture and the headless human suggest death, possibly sky burial, where bodies are left exposed for scavengers. The scorpion, a creature associated with danger and the underworld in many cultures, adds to the ominous tone. But some researchers see more than symbolism. They see a star map. In 2017, researchers Martin Sweatman and Dimitrios Tsikritsis published a paper arguing that Pillar 43 records a cosmic catastrophe. They propose that the scorpion represents the constellation Scorpius, the bird represents Cygnus or Aquila, and the circular shapes represent the sun or other celestial bodies. According to their interpretation, the pillar depicts the sky as it appeared around 10,950 BCE, at the beginning of the Younger Dryas period, a time of sudden and dramatic climate change. The Younger Dryas is a well-established geological event. Around 10,950 years ago, the Earth's climate, which had been warming steadily as the last ice age ended, suddenly reversed. Temperatures plunged. Glaciers advanced. Rainfall patterns shifted. The change was abrupt, happening within decades, and it lasted for roughly 1,200 years before warming resumed. The cause of the Younger Dryas has been debated for decades. Some believe it was triggered by the sudden drainage of glacial lakes, flooding the oceans and disrupting ocean currents. Others propose volcanic eruptions or shifts in solar radiation. But Sweatman and colleagues propose a different cause: a comet impact. They argue that a large comet or asteroid struck the Earth or exploded in the atmosphere, triggering massive wildfires, tsunamis, and climate disruption. The evidence for this impact hypothesis is contested. Some geological studies claim to have found impact markers, such as high concentrations of platinum and microscopic diamonds, in sediment layers dating to the Younger Dryas onset. Other studies dispute these findings, suggesting the markers are natural or misinterpreted. The idea that Pillar 43 records this event is based on the alignment of the carved animals with constellations as they would have appeared at that time. If the scorpion is Scorpius and the bird is Cygnus, then the configuration matches the sky in 10,950 BCE. The circular shapes at the top, Sweatman suggests, could represent the sun and the comet, or fragments of the comet, streaking across the sky. If this interpretation is correct, it would mean that Göbekli Tepe is not just a temple, but a memorial. A monument built by survivors of the catastrophe, a warning carved in stone for future generations. It would mean that the builders witnessed the event, remembered it, and felt compelled to record it, to ensure that the knowledge would not be lost. This is a dramatic claim, and it is controversial. Many archaeologists reject it, arguing that the interpretation is speculative, that the alignment is forced, and that the evidence for the impact itself is insufficient. The animals, they say, are more likely totems or mythological figures, not astronomical symbols. The pillar is about belief, not astronomy. But others find the theory compelling. Graham Hancock, a journalist and author who has written extensively about lost civilizations and ancient catastrophes, has championed the idea. He argues that the Younger Dryas impact, if it occurred, would have devastated early human societies, erasing much of what had been built, and that sites like Göbekli Tepe represent the efforts of survivors to rebuild, to preserve what knowledge they could. The debate continues. New studies are published. New evidence is examined. At present, the impact hypothesis remains unproven, but not disproven. The astronomical interpretation of Pillar 43 is possible, but not certain. It is one reading among many, intriguing, provocative, but not yet validated by consensus. What can we say with confidence? Only this: the Younger Dryas was real. The climate changed dramatically. Human societies would have been affected, and Göbekli Tepe was built in the centuries following that event. Whether the two are connected, whether the builders were motivated by memory of catastrophe, we cannot say for certain. But the timing is suggestive. Now let us consider a question that is both simple and profound. Why does Göbekli Tepe exist at the highest point of the plateau? The site sits at the summit of a ridge, overlooking the plains below. From the enclosures, on a clear day, you can see for miles in every direction. The view is commanding. The location is deliberate. But why choose the top of a hill? Practically, it is inconvenient. Water must be collected and stored. Materials must be hauled uphill. The wind is stronger. The winters are harsher. If the goal was simply to build a gathering place, a lower location, near a river or spring, would be far easier. But the hilltop offers something else. Visibility. From the plains below, Göbekli Tepe would be visible. A landmark. A beacon. People approaching from miles away would see it, know where they were going, recognize the site from a distance. This matters if the site is a regional center, a place of pilgrimage, a destination for dispersed communities. And from the hilltop, the sky is closer. The horizon is wider. The stars are brighter, less obscured by terrain. If the site has an astronomical function, if tracking the heavens is part of its purpose, then elevation helps. The higher you are, the clearer the view. There is also symbolism. Mountains and high places have been considered sacred in many cultures throughout history. They are closer to the gods, to the heavens, to the realm beyond the mundane. Climbing to the summit is an act of ascent, a movement from the ordinary world to a space set apart. Göbekli Tepe, on its hill, would have been liminal, a threshold between earth and sky, human and divine. But again, this is interpretation. We do not know what the builders thought about height, about hills, about the relationship between elevation and sacredness. We can only observe that they chose this place, and that the choice matters. One more question worth considering. Why are there no burials? Most ancient sites, especially those associated with ritual or religion, contain burials, graves, tombs, human remains deliberately interred with care. But at Göbekli Tepe, no intact burials have been found. Human bones are present, scattered fragments in the fill, but no complete skeletons, no formal graves. This is unusual. If the site is a sanctuary, a place of gathering and ritual, we would expect the dead to be honored there. Ancestors buried beneath the stones, graves marked with offerings. But there is nothing like that. The human bones that have been found are fragmentary, disarticulated, and in some cases, modified. 3 partial skulls have been recovered, all showing signs of deliberate alteration, grooves carved into the bone, holes drilled. These are not burial goods. They are something else. Some researchers suggest that the lack of burials indicates that Göbekli Tepe was not a place for the dead, or at least not for the buried dead. If sky burial was practiced, if bodies were exposed on the plateau for vultures and other scavengers to consume, then the bones would be scattered, carried away, not interred. The modified skulls might be the result of secondary treatment, where skulls were cleaned, decorated, and kept as relics, objects of veneration or memory. This practice, the deliberate modification of human skulls, is known from other Neolithic sites in the region. At Çatalhöyük, skulls were plastered and painted, given faces, kept in homes. At Jericho, similar practices occurred. The skull becomes an object, a way to maintain connection with the dead, to keep them present in some form. At Göbekli Tepe, the modifications are different, more abstract, less about recreating the person and more about transforming the skull into something else. A vessel, a symbol. We do not know what it meant to them, but it suggests that death, memory, and transformation were part of the site's purpose. Or perhaps the burials are simply elsewhere. Perhaps the dead were taken to another location, a necropolis we have not yet found. Göbekli Tepe covers a large area, and only 10% has been excavated. The answers may still be underground. Let us summarize what we have seen in this section. Göbekli Tepe raises questions that current archaeology cannot fully answer. The origin of the knowledge, the precise purpose of the site, the meaning of the symbols, the astronomical interpretations, the choice of location, the absence of burials, all are subjects of ongoing debate. We have evidence, but not certainty. We have possibilities, but not proof. This is not a failure of science. This is the nature of inquiry. We work with what remains. We propose theories. We test them. We revise. And we accept that some questions may never be fully resolved. But the existence of these questions does not invalidate what we know. Göbekli Tepe is real. The stones are there. The dates are reliable. The achievement is undeniable. The mysteries do not erase the facts. They deepen them. And now, having established what we know and what we do not, we arrive at the threshold of speculation. The alternative theories, the ideas that challenge the orthodox timeline, the possibility, however remote, that the story we have been told is incomplete. Let us proceed carefully. Let us distinguish between evidence and hypothesis, between possibility and probability. Let us explore these ideas with open minds, but also with critical eyes, because the truth, whatever it is, deserves our honesty. Chapter 4. The Alternative Hypothesis. We have walked through the certainties and the uncertainties. We have seen what archaeology proves and what it struggles to explain. Now we arrive at a different kind of territory. Not the realm of verified fact, but the landscape of possibility. The alternative theories. The ideas that push against the boundaries of accepted history. This is delicate ground. Here, we must be especially careful to distinguish between what is proven, what is plausible, and what is merely imaginative. We must respect evidence while remaining open to revision, because science progresses not by clinging to orthodoxy, but by questioning it, testing it, and when necessary, overturning it. But questioning must be disciplined. It must be grounded in evidence, not wishful thinking. It must acknowledge when a theory is speculative, when the data is insufficient, when the burden of proof has not been met. With that framework in mind, let us explore the central alternative hypothesis. The idea that Göbekli Tepe is older than the radiocarbon dates suggest that it was not built 11,600 years ago, but tens of thousands of years earlier, and that if this is true, it would indicate the existence of a sophisticated culture, perhaps even a civilization, that predates everything we currently recognize as the beginning of human history. This is not a fringe idea in the sense that it comes from nowhere. It has been proposed by researchers, debated in academic papers, and discussed widely in popular media. But it remains, for now, outside the mainstream consensus. Let us examine why it has appeal, what evidence might support it, and what evidence argues against it. The core argument is this: radiocarbon dating measures organic material. Carbon-14, a radioactive isotope, decays at a known rate. By measuring how much carbon-14 remains in a sample of wood, bone, or plant matter, scientists can determine how long ago that organism died. This method is reliable, widely used, and has been validated repeatedly. But stone cannot be dated this way. Limestone contains no carbon-14. It is inorganic, formed from the compressed remains of ancient marine organisms over millions of years. When you carve a pillar from limestone, you are working with material that is already millions of years old. The act of carving does not reset any radioactive clock. The stone itself tells you nothing about when it was shaped. What radiocarbon dating tells us at Göbekli Tepe is when the organic material around the stones, the charcoal, the bone, the plant remains, was deposited. This material comes from the fill, the sediment packed around the pillars when the site was buried. It also comes from the layers below the structures, the surfaces on which the enclosures were built. These dates cluster around 9,500 to 8,000 BCE. This tells us when the site was actively used and when it was covered. But does it tell us when the stones were first carved and erected? The alternative hypothesis says no. It suggests that the pillars could have been standing for much longer, perhaps thousands of years, before the radiocarbon-dated material accumulated around them. If the stones were carved, say, 20,000 years ago, or 30,000, or even more, and then stood exposed to the elements for millennia, and only later were surrounded by human activity that left organic debris, then the radiocarbon dates would reflect that later activity, not the original construction. This is technically possible. Stone does not decay. It endures. A pillar carved 50,000 years ago would look, chemically, identical to one carved 5,000 years ago. The only way to tell the difference would be through context, through the material found with it, and through weathering patterns. So let us examine these lines of evidence. First, context. At Göbekli Tepe, the context is consistent. The tools found at the site, the thousands of flint blades and stone hammers, are typical of the pre-pottery Neolithic period. They match tools from other sites of the same era. The animal bones, the processed cereals, the grinding stones, all are consistent with the late PPNA and early PPNB periods. There is no evidence of older technologies, no anomalous artifacts that suggest an earlier time. If the site had been built tens of thousands of years earlier, we would expect to find tools and debris from that earlier period. Paleolithic tools, for instance, are distinctly different from Neolithic tools. They are larger, cruder, made with different techniques. But no Paleolithic artifacts have been found at Göbekli Tepe in contexts that suggest they were used in the construction. This is a significant point against the older date hypothesis. The technological signature of the site is Neolithic, not Paleolithic. It fits the 11,600-year timeline. Second, weathering. Stone exposed to the elements for long periods shows characteristic signs of decay: wind erosion, water erosion, freeze-thaw cycles that crack and pit the surface, lichens and biological growth. If the pillars at Göbekli Tepe had stood exposed for 20 or 30,000 years before being buried, we would expect to see far more weathering than we do. But the stones are in remarkably good condition. The carvings are sharp. The surfaces are smooth. There is weathering, yes, but it is consistent with the accepted timeline. not with tens of thousands of years of exposure. The burial, whether intentional or natural, protected the stones. If they had stood unprotected for millennia before that burial, the degradation would be far more severe. This, too, argues against the older date hypothesis. Third, stratigraphy. The layers of sediment beneath the structures, the surfaces on which the enclosures were built, have been analyzed. These layers date to the PPNA period. There are no older layers containing evidence of earlier construction, no signs that an ancient site was cleared and reused. If Göbekli Tepe was originally built in deep prehistory, we would expect to find evidence of that earlier phase beneath the current structures. But the bedrock beneath the pillars is natural, unworked, except for the sockets carved to hold the pillars. The construction happened directly on the prepared surface, and that surface dates to the Neolithic. So the contextual evidence, the weathering patterns, and the stratigraphy all support the orthodox timeline. The site was built around 9500 BCE, used for 1500 years, and buried around 8000 BCE. But the alternative hypothesis does not rely solely on the possibility of older stones. It rests on a broader argument that the sophistication of Göbekli Tepe, the sudden appearance of such advanced techniques, the lack of a clear developmental sequence, suggests that the builders inherited knowledge from an earlier, more advanced culture. A culture that existed before the Younger Dryas, before the end of the Ice Age, and that was largely destroyed, leaving only fragments, echoes, survivors who carried forward what they could. This is the lost civilization hypothesis, and it is most prominently associated with the work of Graham Hancock, a British journalist and author whose books, including Fingerprints of the Gods and Magicians of the Gods, have popularized the idea for millions of readers worldwide. Hancock's argument, simplified, is this. Before the Younger Dryas, during the last ice age, sea levels were much lower than they are today, roughly 120 meters lower. This exposed vast coastal plains, now submerged beneath the oceans. These coastal areas would have been prime habitats, temperate, resource-rich, ideal for human settlement. If a sophisticated culture developed along these ancient coastlines, building their cities and monuments near the sea, then when the Ice Age ended and sea levels rose, those sites would have been drowned, lost beneath hundreds of feet of water. The Younger Dryas, Hancock argues, was triggered by a cataclysm, likely the impact of a comet or asteroid. This impact caused massive wildfires, tsunamis, and a sudden climate reversal. The civilization that existed before the impact was devastated. Most of its people perished. Its cities were destroyed or submerged. Only a few survived, scattered refugees who fled inland, carrying with them fragments of the knowledge their culture had accumulated. These survivors, Hancock suggests, settled among less advanced hunter-gatherer groups and taught them what they could: agriculture, construction, astronomy, symbolism. The knowledge was incomplete, fragmented, but it was enough to seed new developments. And Göbekli Tepe, in this view, is one of the results. Not the invention of hunter-gatherers, but the legacy of an earlier civilization, preserved and passed down by survivors who remembered a world now lost. This is a compelling narrative. It explains the sudden sophistication. It accounts for the lack of a developmental sequence. It gives meaning to the astronomical alignments and the symbolic complexity. And it resonates emotionally, the idea that we are not the first, that civilizations have risen and fallen before, that history is deeper and more cyclical than the linear progress narrative suggests. But is it true? Let us examine the evidence Hancock and others cite in support of the hypothesis, and let us also examine the counter-arguments. First, the Younger Dryas impact. This is a real scientific debate, not a fringe theory. In 2007, a group of researchers proposed that a comet or asteroid struck North America around 10,950 years ago, triggering the Younger Dryas cooling event. They pointed to evidence such as a thin layer of sediment containing high concentrations of platinum, nanodiamonds, and magnetic spherules, materials associated with extraterrestrial impacts found at sites across North America and Europe. This hypothesis generated significant interest and further research. Some studies have supported it, finding similar markers in sediment layers from the correct time period. Other studies have disputed it, arguing that the markers are natural, that they can be produced by wildfires or other terrestrial processes, and that the timing does not align consistently across all sites. As of now, the scientific community is divided. The impact hypothesis is not proven, but it has not been definitively disproven either. It remains an active area of research. Respected geologists and archaeologists are on both sides of the debate. What does this mean for Göbekli Tepe? If the impact occurred, and if it caused widespread devastation, then it is plausible that human societies were affected, that populations declined, that knowledge was lost. And it is plausible that Göbekli Tepe, built in the centuries after the Younger Dryas, represents an effort by survivors to rebuild, to create something lasting in the wake of catastrophe. But plausibility is not proof. Even if the impact happened, it does not automatically follow that a lost civilization existed before it. The two ideas are separate. The impact could have affected hunter-gatherer societies without there being an advanced pre-impact culture. The existence of Göbekli Tepe does not require a lost civilization to explain it. The orthodox interpretation that motivated hunter-gatherers built it remains viable. Second, the submerged coastlines. Hancock is correct that sea levels were much lower during the Ice Age and that vast areas now underwater were once dry land. These ancient coastlines have not been thoroughly explored. Underwater archaeology is difficult, expensive, and limited in scope. Only a tiny fraction of the submerged continental shelves have been surveyed in detail. Could there be ruins beneath the waves? Possibly. There have been claims of underwater structures at various locations around the world. Yonaguni, off the coast of Japan, features rock formations that some interpret as man-made terraces and walls. The Gulf of Cambay, off the coast of India, has sonar anomalies that some suggest are submerged cities. The Bimini Road, off the coast of the Bahamas, is a formation of limestone blocks that some believe is an ancient road or wall. But in each case, mainstream archaeology has examined the evidence and concluded that the formations are natural. Yonaguni, most geologists agree, is a natural sandstone formation shaped by erosion and tectonic activity. The Gulf of Cambay anomalies have not been verified by direct investigation. The Bimini Road is beach rock, a natural formation created by the cementation of sand and shells in shallow water. This does not mean that no submerged sites exist. Ancient settlements near coastlines certainly do. Sites from the Mesolithic and early Neolithic have been found underwater in the Mediterranean, the North Sea, and elsewhere. But these are small-scale habitations, fishing camps, tool scatters, not evidence of advanced civilizations. They fit within the expected timeline of human development. If a sophisticated Ice Age civilization existed, with cities, monuments, and complex technology, we would expect to find more than ambiguous sonar readings. We would expect to find artifacts, tools, pottery, building materials. Even underwater, even after thousands of years, something should remain. Stone structures do not dissolve. Metal corrodes but leaves traces. Yet despite decades of searching, no unambiguous evidence of such a civilization has been found. This is the central weakness of the lost civilization hypothesis. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. True. But at some point, the continued absence of evidence becomes significant. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and so far, that evidence has not materialized. Third, the global parallels. Hancock and others point to similarities in megalithic construction techniques across widely separated cultures. T-shaped pillars at Göbekli Tepe and at Tiahuanaco in Bolivia. Precision stonework at Baalbek in Lebanon and at Sacsayhuaman in Peru. These similarities, they argue, suggest a common source, a shared inheritance from a lost culture that influenced multiple regions. But archaeologists have a different explanation. Independent invention. Human beings, faced with similar challenges, often arrive at similar solutions. The wheel was invented independently in multiple places. Writing emerged separately in Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, and Mesoamerica. Pyramids were built by cultures that never had contact with each other. Why? Because the pyramid is a stable form, easy to construct, and symbolically powerful. It makes sense. Similarly, T-shaped pillars, or stones shaped to fit together with precision, are logical developments when working with stone. They do not require a common source. They require people observing the properties of stone and figuring out how to use them effectively. The fact that these techniques appear at different times, in different places, separated by thousands of years, also argues against a single lost civilization. Göbekli Tepe dates to roughly 9,500 BCE. Tiahuanaco dates to roughly 500 CE, more than 10,000 years later. If they share a common source, that source would have to have influenced cultures across an enormous span of time, which seems unlikely. More plausible is that people in different eras, facing the need to build enduring structures, came up with similar methods. Convergent evolution, but for technology and architecture. Fourth, the myths. Many cultures around the world have flood myths, stories of a great deluge that destroyed an earlier world, leaving only a few survivors. The biblical story of Noah, the epic of Gilgamesh from Mesopotamia, the story of Manu in Hindu tradition, Deucalion in Greek mythology, Aboriginal Australian tales of rising seas, Native American stories of world-ending floods. Hancock argues that these myths preserve the memory of the sea level rise at the end of the Ice Age, or the tsunamis triggered by the Younger Dryas impact. The stories, he suggests, are not mere fantasy. They are cultural memory, passed down through oral tradition for thousands of years, recording real events. This is not an unreasonable idea. Oral traditions can preserve information over long periods. Aboriginal Australians have stories that accurately describe coastal features now submerged, suggesting the stories are at least 7,000 years old. Other cultures have oral histories that align with geological events. But flood myths are also explainable without invoking a global catastrophe. Floods are common. Rivers overflow. Storm surges inundate coastlines. Tsunamis strike. Every culture experiences floods at some point, and devastating floods leave deep impressions. A single catastrophic flood in a region could give rise to a story that, over time, becomes mythologized, expanded, universalized. The fact that many cultures have flood myths may simply reflect the fact that floods are a universal human experience, not evidence of a single worldwide event. So where does this leave us? The alternative hypothesis, the idea that Göbekli Tepe is the legacy of a lost Ice Age civilization, is not supported by the current evidence. The radiocarbon dates, the contextual artifacts, the weathering patterns, and the stratigraphy all point to construction in the Neolithic period, around 9,500 BCE. The lack of evidence for pre-Younger Dryas advanced cultures, despite extensive searching, suggests they did not exist, or at least not in the form the hypothesis requires. But absence of evidence is not conclusive. The hypothesis cannot be entirely dismissed. It is possible, if unlikely, that future discoveries will change the picture. Underwater archaeology may yet find something unexpected. New sites may be uncovered that push back the timeline. The burden of proof, however, rests on those making the claim, and for now, that proof is lacking. What we can say with confidence is this: the Younger Dryas was a real event. Climate changed dramatically. Human societies were affected. And Göbekli Tepe was built in the aftermath by people who may have been motivated by the memory of that upheaval, who may have sought to create something permanent, something that would endure beyond their lifetimes, a monument to resilience, to survival, to the human refusal to be erased by catastrophe. Whether they inherited knowledge from an earlier, lost culture, or whether they developed that knowledge themselves through ingenuity and determination, we cannot say with certainty. But either way, what they achieved is extraordinary. And either way, the mystery remains, waiting beneath the earth, challenging us to look deeper, to question more carefully, to remain open to the possibility that history is stranger, deeper, and more complex than we yet understand. Now let us turn from speculation to synthesis. Let us gather what we have learned, what we know, and what we do not, and let us ask, honestly, what the evidence actually tells us. Not what we wish it to tell us. Not what makes the best story, but what the stones, the bones, the tools, and the dates reveal, when we listen carefully, without bias, without agenda. Chapter 5. What the evidence actually tells us. We have journeyed through facts and questions, through orthodoxy and alternative theories. We have examined the stones, the dates, the symbols, and the speculation. Now let us step back, let us take a breath, and let us ask, as honestly as we can, what does the evidence actually reveal? Not what we hope to find, not what would make the most dramatic story, but what is actually there, verifiable, reproducible, grounded in the methods and standards of careful inquiry. This is where intellectual humility matters most. The willingness to say, we know this, we think that, and we wonder about the rest. The discipline to distinguish between certainty, probability, and possibility. The courage to admit when the answer is simply, we do not yet know. Let us begin with the certainties. What can we say with confidence about Göbekli Tepe? First, the site exists. This seems obvious, but it is worth stating. Göbekli Tepe is not a myth, not a legend, not a disputed claim. It is there, in southeastern Turkey, carved from limestone, measurable, photographable, visitable. The pillars stand. The enclosures are real. This is not a matter of interpretation. It is fact. Second, the site is old. Radiocarbon dating, applied to organic material from multiple contexts across the site, consistently places the active use of Göbekli Tepe between approximately 9,500 and 8,000 years before the Common Era. That is 11,500 to 10,000 years ago. Different laboratories, different samples, different methods, all converge on this timeline. The dating is reliable. Third, the site was built during the pre-pottery Neolithic period, a time before the widespread use of pottery, before the full domestication of plants and animals. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were, by all evidence, primarily hunter-gatherers, or at the very least, people in the process of transitioning from hunting and gathering to early forms of cultivation. The tools they used, the animals they hunted, the plants they processed, all are consistent with this period. Fourth, the construction required significant organization and effort. The pillars weigh between 8 and 50 tons. They were quarried from the plateau, transported across uneven ground, erected upright, and arranged in circular enclosures with geometric precision. This was not the work of a few individuals over a few days. This required planning, coordination, sustained labor over years, perhaps generations. It required leadership, shared purpose, and the ability to mobilize and sustain large groups of people. Fifth, the site was decorated with sophisticated carvings. Animals, snakes, foxes, lions, boars, birds, all rendered with anatomical accuracy and artistic confidence. Abstract symbols, H shapes, crescents, V forms, circles, carved with intention and repeated across multiple pillars. These are not random marks. They mean something, even if we do not fully understand what. Sixth, the site was eventually covered. Whether deliberately buried as an act of preservation or ritual closure, or naturally filled by landslides and erosion, the enclosures were packed with sediment, rubble, and debris. This covering protected the structures from weathering and destruction, allowing them to survive for 10,000 years until their rediscovery in the late 20th century. These are the certainties. Verified. Established. Not in dispute among serious researchers. Now let us turn to the probabilities. What does the evidence strongly suggest, even if absolute proof is elusive? First, Göbekli Tepe likely served a communal and ritual function. The scale of the structures, the effort required to build them, the presence of animal bones from feasting, the lack of extensive domestic debris in the earliest phases, all suggest that the site was a gathering place, a center for events that brought together dispersed groups. Whether we call it a temple, a sanctuary, or a ceremonial center, the function appears to have been more than purely utilitarian. Second, the site was probably part of a larger regional network. The discovery of similar sites nearby, Karahan Tepe, Habet-Suvan, Sefer Tepe, with comparable architecture and iconography, indicates that Göbekli Tepe was not an isolated anomaly. It was part of a shared culture, a constellation of communities connected by belief, practice, and perhaps kinship. Third, the builders likely possessed knowledge passed down through generations. The sophistication of the construction, the precision of the geometry, the confidence of the carvings, all suggest inherited skill. Whether this knowledge came from an older tradition now lost to us, or whether it was developed organically within the communities that built the site, is unclear. But it seems improbable that such mastery appeared spontaneously, without precedent or practice. Fourth, astronomical observation probably played some role in the site's conception or use. The alignments, while not perfect, are suggestive. The imagery, birds and animals that could represent constellations, the possible encoding of lunar or solar cycles, all point toward an awareness of the sky, a tracking of celestial movements. This does not mean Göbekli Tepe was primarily an observatory, but it suggests that the builders paid attention to the heavens, that they saw connections between earth and sky, and that they may have encoded that understanding in their monument. Fifth, the covering of the site, whether intentional or natural, was likely influenced by environmental factors. Evidence of landslides, documented damage to enclosures, repairs made during the site's active use, all indicate that the plateau was unstable, prone to erosion and collapse. Even if the final burial was deliberate, it may have been a response to this instability, a decision to protect what could no longer be safely maintained. These are the probabilities, strongly suggested by the evidence, supported by multiple lines of analysis, but not absolutely certain. Reasonable people examining the same data might weight these conclusions differently, but most would agree they are more likely true than false. Now let us turn to the possibilities. What might be true? What is conceivable within the bounds of the evidence, even if not yet proven? First, it is possible that the knowledge embodied in Göbekli Tepe has deeper roots than we currently recognize. That the techniques, the symbols, the architectural principles were inherited from earlier traditions that worked in materials which did not survive: wood, fiber, organic structures that decayed long ago. If this is true, then Göbekli Tepe represents not the beginning of a tradition, but its first expression in stone, the moment when ephemeral knowledge was made permanent. Second, it is possible that the site encodes information we have not yet deciphered. The symbols, the arrangements of pillars, the alignments, may contain meanings, messages, or records that we lack the context to interpret. Future discoveries, new methods of analysis, or simply a deeper understanding of the culture that built the site may one day allow us to read what is written there. Third, it is possible that the site was built in response to the Younger Dryas, as a monument to survival, a marker of resilience in the face of catastrophic change. If the climate shift caused widespread hardship, if communities were displaced, if the world felt unstable and dangerous, then the effort to build something monumental, something enduring, makes emotional and symbolic sense. A way of asserting permanence in a time of impermanence. Fourth, it is possible that older structures lie buried deeper beneath the layers we have excavated so far. Only 10% of Göbekli Tepe has been uncovered. 90% remains underground. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed anomalies, voids, electromagnetic signatures that suggest more enclosures, more pillars, possibly older phases of construction. Until we excavate further, we cannot rule out the possibility that the site has a longer, more complex history than we currently understand. Fifth, it is possible that the pillars themselves are older than the contexts in which they were found. This is the least probable of the possibilities listed here, given the evidence of weathering, stratigraphy, and associated artifacts, but it cannot be entirely dismissed. If the stones were quarried and carved at an earlier time, then stood for centuries before being incorporated into the enclosures we see today, the radiocarbon dates would reflect the later phase, not the original carving. This would require evidence we do not currently have, but the possibility exists. These are the possibilities. Conceivable, within the range of what the evidence allows, but speculative. They require further research, more data, continued excavation. They are not facts. They are questions. And now, let us address the uncertainties. What do we genuinely not know, despite all the research, all the analysis, all the debate? First, we do not know the precise purpose of Göbekli Tepe. Ritual center? Yes. Gathering place? Yes. But what rituals were performed there? What beliefs motivated the construction? What did the gatherings celebrate or commemorate? We can propose theories, initiation rites, ancestor worship, astronomical ceremonies, feasting, and social bonding, but we cannot verify them. The builders left no written records. Their voices are silent. Second, we do not know what the symbols mean. We can describe them, catalogue them, note where they appear, but we cannot read them. Are they proto-writing, cosmological diagrams, clan markers, religious icons? We are guessing. Educated guessing, perhaps, but guessing nonetheless. Third, we do not know where the knowledge came from. Why does Göbekli Tepe appear so suddenly, so fully formed, without clear antecedents? Is there an earlier tradition we have not found? Did the knowledge come from elsewhere, transmitted by contact with other groups, or did it develop locally, in ways that left no archaeological trace? We do not know. Fourth, we do not know whether the astronomical alignments are intentional. Some researchers are convinced they are, others are skeptical. The evidence is ambiguous. The alignments exist, but whether they are meaningful or coincidental remains debated. Without additional context, we cannot resolve this question definitively. Fifth, we do not know why the site was abandoned. Was it environmental, the landslides and instability making it unsafe? Was it cultural, a shift in beliefs or practices that rendered the site obsolete? Was it demographic, populations declining or moving elsewhere? Or was it something else, an event or decision we cannot reconstruct from the fragments that remain? We do not know. And finally, we do not know what lies beneath. 90% of Göbekli Tepe is still buried. What is down there? More enclosures, older structures, burials, artifacts that will change our understanding, or simply more of the same, variations on what we have already seen. We will not know until we dig. So let us summarize. The certainties are solid. The site is real, old, built by Neolithic hunter-gatherers with remarkable skill and organization. The probabilities are strong. It served a communal ritual function, was part of a regional network, and likely involved astronomical observation. The possibilities are intriguing but unproven. Older roots, encoded knowledge, deeper layers yet to be found. And the uncertainties are honest. We do not know the purpose, the meanings, the origins, or what remains hidden. This is the landscape of knowledge as it currently stands. Solid ground, probable paths, possible routes, and unmapped territory. And here is what this tells us. Göbekli Tepe is extraordinary with or without speculation. It does not need to be older than 11,600 years to be profound. It does not need to be the work of a lost civilization to challenge our assumptions. The verified facts alone are enough to overturn the old model of human development, to force us to acknowledge that our ancestors were capable of far more, far earlier, than we once believed. The orthodox timeline, the mainstream interpretation, already presents a miracle. Hunter-gatherers, people without cities, without writing, without metal, without wheels, organized themselves to quarry, transport, and erect 50-ton pillars. They carved those pillars with artistic mastery. They arranged them with geometric precision. They gathered by the hundreds, perhaps thousands, to feast and build and participate in something larger than themselves. And they sustained this effort over generations, creating a monument that has endured for more than 10,000 years. This is not diminished by being 11,600 years old instead of 20 or 30,000. The achievement stands regardless. And the mysteries, the unanswered questions, are not failures. They are invitations. Invitations to continue exploring, to keep digging, to develop new methods, to ask better questions. Science is not a collection of final answers. It is a process, ongoing, self-correcting, cumulative. What we know today is more than we knew yesterday, and less than we will know tomorrow. Göbekli Tepe teaches us humility. It reminds us that the past is deeper and stranger than we imagined, that our models are incomplete. That certainty is rare and should be held lightly. That wonder and rigor are not opposites but partners, each strengthening the other. We stand before these stones, and we see what they are: massive, ancient, beautiful, mysterious. We measure them, date them, analyze them. We propose theories, test hypotheses, revise conclusions. And through it all, the stones remain, patient, enduring, holding their secrets close. They have waited 11,600 years, perhaps longer. They can wait a while longer still, as we learn, slowly, painstakingly, to listen properly, to hear not what we wish to hear, but what they are actually saying. And what they say, when we listen carefully, is this: we were here, we built this, we mattered, remember us. That message, simple and profound, crosses the millennia. It connects us to people we will never meet, whose language we cannot speak, whose beliefs we can only glimpse. But in that connection, something essential is preserved. The recognition that they were human, as we are human, that they wondered, as we wonder, that they sought meaning, permanence, beauty, just as we do. Göbekli Tepe is not just a site. It is a mirror. It reflects our own questions back at us. Who are we? Where do we come from? What are we capable of? What will we leave behind? These questions do not have final answers, but they are worth asking. And Göbekli Tepe, standing silent on its plateau, reminds us that they have always been worth asking, that every generation must ask them anew, that the search for understanding is itself a kind of monument, less tangible than stone, but no less enduring. Now, let us turn from analysis to implication, from what the evidence tells us to what it means, for our understanding of the past, for our view of ourselves, and for the future we are building, knowingly or not, with every choice we make. Chapter 6. The bigger implications. We have examined the stones. We have weighed the evidence. We have walked through certainty and uncertainty, fact and speculation. Now let us ask a different kind of question. Not what happened, but what it means. Not how old the stones are, but what their existence tells us about ourselves, about history, about the nature of civilization, and the fragility of memory. Because Göbekli Tepe is not just an archaeological puzzle to be solved. It is a mirror held up to our assumptions, a challenge to the stories we tell about progress, development, and human capability. And depending on which interpretation we accept, the orthodox or the alternative, the implications are profound, different, but equally unsettling. Let us begin with the orthodox view, the mainstream interpretation, the careful, evidence-based conclusion that Göbekli Tepe was built 11,600 years ago by hunter-gatherer societies during the pre-pottery Neolithic period. If this is correct, and the evidence strongly suggests it is, what does it mean? It means we have underestimated our ancestors. Profoundly. For generations, we have operated under a model that placed hunter-gatherers at the bottom of a developmental ladder. Simple people, living hand to mouth, focused on survival, incapable of sustained organization, complex thought, or monumental ambition. We assumed that sophistication required agriculture, that agriculture enabled surplus, that surplus allowed specialization, and that specialization led to cities, writing, and civilization. Göbekli Tepe shatters that model. Here, sophistication precedes agriculture. Monumental architecture precedes settled life. Organization and ambition exist without cities or surplus. The ladder is not a ladder at all. It is a web, interconnected, with multiple pathways, no single sequence that all societies must follow. This changes how we understand human capability. It tells us that the cognitive and social abilities required to build something like Göbekli Tepe, planning, cooperation, symbolic thinking, aesthetic sensibility, were present in humans far earlier than we thought. Not newly evolved. Not dependent on agriculture or sedentism. Already there, waiting for the right circumstances, the right motivation, to be expressed. What motivated them? The orthodox view suggests it was belief, religion, spirituality, the desire to create a sacred space, to honor ancestors, to mark the turning of seasons, to connect with forces larger than themselves. Klaus Schmidt famously said, "First came the temple, then the city." He believed that the act of gathering to build, to feast, to worship, created the need for more reliable food sources, and that this need drove the development of agriculture. If he is right, then culture, not economics, is the engine of civilization. Belief, not necessity, drives innovation. People did not settle down and farm because they had to. They did it because they wanted to sustain gatherings like those at Göbekli Tepe. They did it to support a way of life that had meaning, that connected them to each other and to something sacred. This is a radical reordering of priorities. It suggests that humans are not primarily driven by material concerns, by the need for food and shelter, but by the search for meaning, for connection, for transcendence. That we build temples before we build cities, that we carve symbols before we write laws, that we reach for the sacred before we master the mundane. And if hunter-gatherers could do this, if people without agriculture, without metal, without formal institutions, could organize to move 50-ton stones and create something beautiful and enduring, then what does that say about human potential? It says we are capable of far more than our circumstances suggest. That creativity, ambition, and meaning-making are not the products of civilization, they are the foundations of it. That even in the harshest conditions, even when survival is uncertain, humans will strive to create something that lasts, something that transcends the immediate, something that says, we were here, we mattered. This is inspiring. It elevates our ancestors. It grants them dignity, agency, vision. It reminds us that the people who came before us were not primitives waiting for progress to arrive. They were us, fully human, fully capable, simply living in a different time, with different tools, facing different challenges. But this view also carries a weight, because if sophistication is not tied to technology, if meaning and ambition exist independently of material progress, then our own technological civilization is not guaranteed to be meaningful or enduring. We have more tools than the builders of Göbekli Tepe. We have cranes and computers and global supply chains. But do we have their sense of purpose? Their willingness to invest labor and time into something that will outlast them? Their connection to the sacred? Göbekli Tepe, even in the orthodox view, asks uncomfortable questions. What are we building that will last 11,000 years? What are we creating that future archaeologists will uncover and marvel at? Our cities are concrete and steel, designed to last decades, not millennia. Our knowledge is stored digitally, dependent on fragile infrastructure. Our monuments, if we have any, are commercial, functional, not sacred. The builders of Göbekli Tepe carved their knowledge into stone because stone endures. They invested years, generations, into something that served no immediate practical purpose. They built for eternity, or at least for as long as stone can stand. Do we? Or are we, for all our technology, more short-sighted than they were? This is the challenge of the orthodox view. It forces us to reconsider not just the past, but the present. To ask whether we have lost something essential in the transition from sacred ambition to material efficiency, whether progress, as we define it, is actually progress at all. Now let us turn to the alternative view. The hypothesis that Göbekli Tepe is older than the radiocarbon dates suggests that it represents the legacy of a lost civilization, a culture that existed before the Younger Dryas and was largely destroyed, leaving only fragments, survivors who passed down what knowledge they could. If this view is correct, and to be clear, the evidence does not currently support it, but if it is, what would it mean? It would mean that history is not linear but cyclical, that civilizations have risen before, reached heights of knowledge and organization, and then fallen, erased so completely that we have forgotten they ever existed, that we are not the first to build cities, to develop writing, to organize complex societies. We are simply the latest iteration in a cycle that has repeated, perhaps many times, across the deep millennia. This idea resonates deeply in human culture. It appears in myths, in religious traditions, in philosophical systems. The Hindus speak of yugas, great ages that rise and fall. The Greeks spoke of golden ages and ages of iron. The Maya conceived of time as cyclical, worlds created and destroyed in succession. The biblical tradition hints at antediluvian civilizations wiped away by the flood. If these myths preserve memory, if they record real events distorted by time and retelling, then the lost civilization hypothesis offers an explanation. Not alien intervention, not supernatural forces, just human societies, like ours, that grew, flourished, and then collapsed, leaving only scattered traces and the stories of survivors. This would fundamentally change our understanding of human history. The narrative we currently hold, that civilization began 6,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, that writing was invented around 3,200 BCE, that complex societies are a recent development, would be incomplete. These would not be beginnings, but recoveries, rebirths, moments when humanity, having fallen, climbed back up, rebuilt what was lost, and began again. The implications are both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Awe-inspiring, because it suggests that human potential is even greater than we imagined, that our ancestors achieved things we have not rediscovered, that knowledge and sophistication existed in depths of time we have not plumbed. Terrifying because it means that everything can be lost. That no matter how advanced, how powerful, how seemingly permanent a civilization becomes, it can be erased, utterly, leaving almost nothing behind. And if it has happened before, it can happen again. This is where the lost civilization hypothesis becomes a cautionary tale. Because if earlier cultures fell, if their cities were drowned, their monuments buried, their knowledge forgotten, then ours is not immune. We stand on the same precipice. We face the same vulnerabilities. Consider what would survive if our civilization collapsed today. Not gradually, over centuries, but suddenly, catastrophically, in the way the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis suggests the last ice age ended. A comet strike, a supervolcano, a solar flare that destroys electrical grids, a pandemic far worse than any we have faced, nuclear war, climate collapse. Any number of scenarios could, theoretically, bring our complex, interconnected world to its knees. What would remain? Our buildings, the skyscrapers, and factories and houses are not built to last. Concrete crumbles. Steel rusts. Glass shatters. Within a century, without maintenance, most structures would be ruins. Within a millennium, forests and vegetation would reclaim the land. The traces of our cities would be mounds of rubble, hard to distinguish from natural hills. Our knowledge, stored on servers, in hard drives, in the cloud, would vanish with the first prolonged power failure. Magnetic storage degrades. Digital files require functioning infrastructure to access. Even physical books, paper and ink, decay within centuries, if not carefully preserved. The great libraries of the ancient world, Alexandria, Pergamum, burned or crumbled. Ours would fare no better. What would survive are the things we build from stone. Dams, bridges, certain monuments. But even these, without maintenance, would erode, collapse, be buried by sediment, or swallowed by rising seas. A future archaeologist, digging through the layers 10,000 years from now, might find a few anomalous artifacts, strange alloys, fragments of glass, but no cities, no clear evidence of the complexity we achieved. They might conclude we were hunter-gatherers with a few unusual tools. They might not realize that we landed on the moon, that we split the atom, that we connected the entire world through invisible networks, because those achievements leave no trace in stone. Göbekli Tepe endures because it is stone, because its builders chose a medium that resists time. We have not. We have chosen convenience, efficiency, disposability, and in doing so, we have made ourselves, our knowledge, our achievements, ephemeral. The lost civilization hypothesis, whether true or not, forces us to confront this. It asks, what are we preserving? What will future generations inherit from us? If catastrophe strikes, if the cycle turns again, what fragments will remain? Will there be enough for survivors to rebuild? Or will the knowledge be so completely lost that they will have to start from the beginning as though we never existed? These are not comfortable questions, but they are necessary, because the lesson of Göbekli Tepe, in either interpretation, is the same. Nothing is permanent. Knowledge can be lost. Civilizations can fall. Memory is fragile. And if we do not take deliberate steps to preserve what matters, to encode it in forms that endure, to pass it down with care and intention, then it will vanish as thoroughly as the culture that built Göbekli Tepe has vanished, leaving only stones and questions. But there is also hope in this lesson, because if earlier peoples survived catastrophe, if they rebuilt, if they managed to preserve fragments of knowledge and pass them forward, then so can we. Resilience is part of the human story. Adaptation, innovation, the refusal to give up, even when the world falls apart. Göbekli Tepe stands as a testament to that resilience. Whether it was built by survivors of an earlier collapse or by hunter-gatherers determined to create something sacred, it represents the same impulse: to build, to endure, to leave a mark that time cannot erase. And we carry that impulse still. It is in us, the same drive that moved our ancestors to carve those stones, the desire to create meaning, to connect with something larger, to ensure that our existence is not forgotten. The question is, what will we do with it? Will we build for permanence or for profit? Will we encode our knowledge in forms that endure or in formats that obsolete within years? Will we invest in monuments that carry meaning or in structures that serve only function? Will we think in generations, in centuries, in millennia, or only in quarters and election cycles? Göbekli Tepe does not give us answers, but it gives us the questions. And it reminds us that these questions matter, that they have always mattered, and that how we answer them will determine whether, 10,000 years from now, someone stands above the ruins of our world and wonders, as we wonder now, who we were and what we were trying to say. The stones are patient. They have waited. They are waiting still, not for us to solve the mystery, but for us to recognize ourselves in it, to see that the people who carved those pillars were not so different from us, that their struggles, their hopes, their fears echo our own, that the cycle continues, that we are part of it, and that the choices we make now will ripple forward, shaping what remains when we, too, are only memory. This is the weight Göbekli Tepe carries. Not just the weight of stone, but the weight of meaning, the responsibility of knowledge, the burden of continuity. And it asks us, quietly but insistently, whether we are worthy inheritors of the human story, or simply another chapter that will be forgotten, buried beneath the earth, waiting for some distant future to uncover and puzzle over what we left behind. Chapter 7. Closing. The Patient Stones. Night returns to the Anatolian plateau. The same wind that opened our journey moves once more across the ancient hills, carrying the scent of earth and time. Above, the stars wheel slowly, tracing paths they have traced for millennia, indifferent to human questions, patient in their patterns. And below, half revealed, half hidden, the stones of Göbekli Tepe stand in silence. We have walked a long path together, through discovery and debate, through facts and mysteries, through the known and the unknowable. We have seen what archaeology has proven: massive pillars raised by people who were not supposed to be capable of such things. We have examined what remains uncertain: the purpose, the meanings, the origins. And we have considered what might be possible: older routes, lost knowledge, cycles of rise and fall, stretching back into depths of time. We have only begun to imagine. But now, at the end of this journey, let us return to where we began. To the simplest, most fundamental truth. The stones exist. They are there. Real. Solid. Enduring. And that fact alone, regardless of interpretation, regardless of debate, is extraordinary. 11,600 years ago, at least, human beings gathered on this hilltop. They quarried limestone from the plateau beneath their feet. They shaped it with tools made of flint and stone. They carved animals into the surface, snakes and foxes and vultures, rendered with care and skill. They moved these massive pillars, some weighing as much as 50 tons, across uneven ground. They raised them upright. They arranged them in circles. They built something that required coordination, planning, sustained effort over generations. And then, after perhaps 1,500 years of use, they covered it, whether deliberately to preserve what they had made, or naturally, as landslides buried what they could no longer maintain. The result was the same. The site was sealed, protected, hidden beneath the earth for 10,000 years. And when Klaus Schmidt uncovered it again, in 1995, The stones were still there. The carvings were still sharp. The message, whatever it was, had survived. This is what we know. This is what the evidence tells us. And it is enough. Enough to overturn old assumptions about human development. Enough to force us to reconsider the capabilities of our ancestors. Enough to remind us that history is deeper, stranger, and more complex than the neat timelines we construct. We do not need to make Göbekli Tepe older than it is to be amazed by it. We do not need to invoke lost civilizations or ancient aliens to recognize its significance. The verified facts are profound enough. The real mystery is deep enough. Because the question is not just how they did it. The question is why. What drove these people, living in a world we can barely imagine, to invest so much effort into something that served no immediate survival need? Why carve symbols into stone? Why arrange pillars with geometric precision? Why gather by the hundreds, perhaps thousands, to feast and build and participate in something larger than themselves? We will never know the answer with certainty. The builders left no written records. Their voices are lost. But we can recognize the impulse. Because it is still in us. The desire to create meaning, to connect with something sacred, to build something that will outlast our brief lives, to leave a mark that says, "We were here, we mattered, remember us." This impulse is universal. It crosses cultures, crosses time. It is what makes us human. Not our tools, not our technology, but our need to create, to symbolize, to reach beyond the mundane toward the transcendent. Göbekli Tepe embodies that need. It is a monument not just to engineering or organization, but to the human spirit, to the refusal to be limited by circumstances, to the insistence that life is more than survival, that there is beauty worth pursuing, meaning worth preserving, connections worth honoring. And the stones have carried that message forward, through ice ages and empires, through the rise and fall of languages, religions, kingdoms, through the forgetting and the remembering. They have stood, patient, waiting for us to find them, to wonder about them, to see ourselves reflected in what they represent. We stand now at a threshold. 90% of Göbekli Tepe remains buried. Beneath the earth, beneath the layers we have not yet excavated, lie answers to questions we have not yet learned to ask. More enclosures, more pillars, perhaps older structures, perhaps artifacts that will change everything we think we know. The stones are still revealing themselves. Slowly, layer by layer, year by year, and as they do, our understanding grows, shifts, deepens. What we thought we knew proves incomplete. New mysteries emerge. Old certainties are questioned. This is the nature of discovery. Not a straight line toward truth, but a spiral, circling closer, seeing more clearly, while always aware that the full picture remains just beyond reach. And perhaps that is appropriate. Perhaps some mysteries are not meant to be solved completely. Perhaps the value lies not in the answer, but in the asking. In the humility of standing before something ancient and acknowledging that we do not fully understand. In the wonder of recognizing that the people who came before us were capable of things that still astonish us. In the connection that forms across millennia when we realize that their questions were our questions, that their struggles echo ours, that the human story is continuous, unbroken, reaching back into depths we have only begun to explore. Göbekli Tepe reminds us of this continuity. It connects us to a past that is not separate, not other, but part of us. The people who built these stones are our ancestors. Their blood runs in our veins. Their creativity, their ambition, their capacity for wonder, all of it passed down through generations, carried forward in the very structure of who we are. We are their legacy. And what we do now, what we build, what we preserve, what we pass forward, will be our legacy to those who come after. The cycle continues. The questions persist. And the stones, those patient witnesses, remind us that our choices matter, that our actions ripple forward, that we are not separate from history but part of it, writing the next chapter in a story that began long before we arrived and will continue long after we are gone. So, what will we leave behind? What monuments, literal or metaphorical, are we building? What knowledge are we encoding in forms that will endure? What messages are we carving for the future? These are not abstract questions. They are practical, urgent, because the world is fragile, civilizations are fragile, knowledge is fragile, and if we do not take deliberate steps to preserve what matters, it will be lost, as so much has been lost before. The builders of Göbekli Tepe understood this. They chose stone. They invested time. They built for permanence. And because of that choice, their message survived. We can still hear it, faint but clear, echoing across 11,600 years. What will our message be? Will it survive? Will future generations, standing in the ruins of our world, be able to understand who we were, what we valued, what we tried to achieve? Or will we, like so many cultures before us, vanish almost without trace, leaving only fragments, puzzles, questions that can never be fully answered? The choice is ours. The stones cannot make it for us, but they can remind us that it matters, that it has always mattered, that the impulse to preserve, to remember, to honor what came before and think about what comes after is not optional, it is essential. Because memory is how we remain human. Memory connects us to those who came before. Memory allows us to learn from the past, to avoid repeating mistakes, to build on what was achieved. And when memory is lost, when the connection is broken, we are diminished. We become untethered, adrift, without context or continuity. Göbekli Tepe is an anchor. It holds us to the past. It reminds us where we came from. And in doing so, it helps us understand where we might be going. The night deepens. The stars burn cold and bright. The wind moves across the plateau, rattling loose stones, stirring dust that has lain undisturbed for millennia. And the pillars, those silent sentinels, stand as they have stood for so long, waiting. They have waited through the end of the Ice Age, through the birth of agriculture, through the rise of cities, empires, kingdoms, through wars and peace, through languages spoken and forgotten, through beliefs held sacred and then abandoned. They have waited through it all, unchanged, patient, enduring. And they will wait still, for the next discovery, for the next question, for the next generation to stand before them and wonder, as we wonder now, what they mean, why they exist, what the builders were trying to say. The answer, if there is one, lies not just in the stones but in ourselves, in our willingness to listen, to imagine, to honor what we do not fully understand, to recognize that some questions are worth holding even when answers elude us. Göbekli Tepe is a gift, not just to archaeologists or historians, but to all of us. It is a window into a past we thought we knew but did not, a reminder that our ancestors were more capable, more complex, more fully human than we gave them credit for. A challenge to the easy narratives we tell about progress and development, and an invitation to think more deeply about who we are, where we come from, and what we are building for those who will come after. The stones do not judge. They do not demand. They simply stand and wait and hold their silence. But in that silence, there is a question. Quiet but persistent, patient but insistent. What will you do with what you have been given? What will you build? What will you preserve? What will you pass forward? The stones cannot answer for us, but they can remind us that the question matters, that it has always mattered, and that how we respond will determine not just our own legacy, but the legacy of all who came before us, and all who will come after. This is the weight of continuity, the responsibility of being human, the burden and the privilege of standing, however briefly, in the long chain of generations, holding the past in one hand and the future in the other, deciding what to keep and what to let go, what to remember and what to forget, what to honor and what to build. Göbekli Tepe has made its choice. Stone, permanence, endurance, a message carved so deeply that even time cannot erase it. Now it is our turn. The stones are watching. The stars are watching. The future is watching. And the question hangs in the air, unanswered, waiting. What will we choose? The wind moves. The night turns. And the stones stand silent, patient as always, holding their secrets close, holding their questions closer still, waiting for us to be ready, to be worthy, to finally understand what they have been trying to tell us all along. We were here. We built this. We mattered. Remember us. And in remembering, remember yourselves, because you are us. The same impulse, the same wonder, the same refusal to be forgotten, the same hope that something of what we make will survive, will endure, will speak to those who come after and say, "You are not alone. You are not the first. You are part of something larger, older, deeper than you know." The stones have spoken. Now it is time for us to listen, not just with our ears, but with our hearts. Not just as scholars, but as heirs. Not just as observers, but as participants in a story that is still being written. A story that includes us, that depends on us, that will be shaped by the choices we make and the monuments we build, whether in stone or in spirit, whether physical or metaphorical, whether lasting or ephemeral. The journey does not end here. It cannot, because Göbekli Tepe is not an answer. It is a question. And questions, the good ones, the deep ones, the ones that matter, do not end. They echo. They persist. They call us forward, into uncertainty, into mystery, into the unknown. And that, perhaps, is the final gift of Göbekli Tepe. Not certainty, but curiosity. Not answers, but wonder. Not the end of the story, but the beginning of a deeper, longer, more honest inquiry into who we are and what we are capable of. The stones will be here tomorrow, and the day after, and for thousands of days beyond that. They have time. They are patient. And they will wait, as they have always waited, for us to be ready to hear what they have to say. Until then, the wind moves, the stars turn, the night endures, and somewhere beneath the earth, in the darkness, in the silence, 90% of the story waits to be told.